What's going on, everybody? It's DandyDrew here, and we are back for another day of Catan. And I've got a special guest that I'm going to be bringing along. It is the one and only, one of the best players that I know, Rayman. He's going to be joining us. Ray, if you can, just give the audience a hi and maybe a little introduction about yourself. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Rayman200. I'm a good friend of Drew's. We've been playing Catan together for a couple of years now. We started playing in the Catan Camp Discord server, and yeah, we've had a lot of battles, a lot of post game analyses together, and that's what we're doing here, reviewing the game.
Awesome. Yeah, Ray, and I really appreciate it. I mean, to be fair, I don't think you need much of introduction. A lot of players know who you are and your accolades. But for those who don't know, Ray is absolutely one of the best players in the world. I've had the privilege of learning from him, and hopefully I've shared some things with you as well, man. But you have a very unique style, and to say it works is an understatement. I mean, Ray probably has the most tournament wins out of any player in the world. So, I'm really privileged, and I appreciate you spending your time here. And hopefully, everyone, what we're going to be doing is going through one of my games. This was back when I was around 1700 ELO. And Ray and I are going to have a little bit of discussion. We're going to talk about the placements. We're going to go through it pretty much from start to finish. You'll get a little sense of Ray's thought process. We'll kind of make this almost like a little bit of a back and forth as well. And yeah, man, I'm excited. So thanks again, Ray.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And yeah, let's do it.
All right, so let's dive in. We are, looks like the third pick here, and I'm going to start the video. Yeah, this was a game that I played, I think this was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and Ray and I have kind of briefly looked at the position here. I guess, what do you see, Ray? And maybe we can kind of bounce some things back and forth here. What do you typically look for, especially if you're looking at that third or fourth position?
Yeah, well, in ranked games, usually like 4 is king, so we got to anticipate that the 693 spot isn't going to be there for us in third. And then there's some good weed at the bottom, so I'd anticipate probably one of those 3 spots is what we'll end up taking: 693, 5910, or 843. But we'll see, maybe not.
Well, I mean, anyone that watches the channel knows the 693, and there we go. It makes a lot of sense. And look, if you like development cards, if you like Orweed Sheep, if you ever want to learn from somebody, it's Ray. He is the master at it. And like he said, ranked really does cater towards high development cards, playing with the best ore and wheat. And this is a special spot, I feel like, just because you do have the 5 ore, but it is isolated to the desert, which isn't a very attractive starting spot. So I think intuitively the 693 makes a lot of sense. So I guess because that is the key spot there, Ray, how do you usually play when you're dealing with a low ore situation? Because very unlikely that third or fourth is going to get that really high development card game.
Yeah, that's a good point there. I think if you are starting out on low ore or no ore, you need to have a plan to create some ore throughout the game. So that could be building to ore through a road setup, or it could mean having a high production setup where you can port for ore, or a good 2-for-1 port where you can port for ore. But at some point, you're going to need at least 3 for a city, and probably more for a couple of devs.
So it's kind of like, it's not that you have to start with ore, but you have to find a way to get it. And I think that is a very underappreciated way, is that, okay, if you can't produce it outright, then why don't you get a lot of production, hit a port? And that's actually something that we've talked about recently on this channel, specifically as far as like a lesson. How do you feel about the road game? Because it's funny, I know that you're the development card master. Do you find you put yourself in a lot of road situations, or do you tend to avoid it? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of road. I mean, it can work, and sometimes you have to do it because it's the best option available. But I think if you have a choice between a good road game and good, strong Orweed Sheep, I tend to go for Orweed Sheep, but probably a stylistic preference.
It's funny about that. We've played a lot of games together, Ray and I, and there's been cases where, we'll have a hand, and I'll be like, oh, you could just build 2 roads and settle, right? Or build somewhere and get some points. And Ray's like, no, we're going to pop. And I feel like that's always been a funny pendulum of I really love the building, you love the popping, and somehow you always find the mono. So if that's the case, then I'm with you on polling. Now, we are here in the third position, and this one's an interesting one. I'd like to kind of hear your analysis of it, because I have some nuances that I've discovered, especially when I was playing this board. So kind of what do you see here, Ray?
Yeah, I think the two spots that kind of stick out are either the 8-4-3 or 8-4-10 at the bottom, or 6-3-4 to play road. And I think it's more of a neither spot is like incredible, but it's more of a matter of what they each pair with and what kind of setup we're going to get.
Now, I'm trying to remember when we originally looked at this board, because we did some analysis beforehand. There was a few different considerations, and I think you were really pointing at, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's the 8-3-4. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't remember. I think maybe 8-4-10 left or 8-3-4. Yeah, that's where I was leaning.
And to me, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, it's kind of or we cheapen a box. That's what I call it. And you do have this really nice port. Now, this is something, though, that it's really good from a calculations perspective, is you got to kind of look at what happens if you do a certain move, right? Especially if you're going third and then fourth goes back to back. And one of the things I realized that is if we take, let's say, the 8-3-4 now, then what happens is that fourth gets this 6-3-4, 5-4-11. And I wasn't very happy with that consideration. So what I did is I replaced the move order, and I said, well, what if we take the 6-3-4 first? How does that change the dynamic of the board? And what happens is, well, now the 8-3-4 is not as attractive for fourth. So what happens is they take something more along the lines of like the 10-3-8 point left, and then the 5-4-11 point left as well. So, I mean, why don't we kind of go through and we can keep talking about this? But I do find, and Ray's also a chess player, the aspect of calculating the position is very underappreciated in Catan.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. Especially here where there isn't like a spot that's like significantly higher production, and then another is about what each of the kind of four good spots are with. And I think, yeah, as you were saying, that, even though it's not a starting road, technically starting with the road materials here probably make carrying things a little bit easier.
Yeah. I'm curious, Ray, so when you're given a position, and there's a lot of options here, really, I mean, there's a lot of still really juicy spots. How many options do you typically look at? Do you find that intuitively you just kind of go to one that makes sense, or do you calculate maybe 2 or 3 different variations? How does that typically play out for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sometimes there are spots that are just too good to leave to the other player. And then you kind of look at that spot and figure out, go down that line and see what fourth will take, and then what you'll be left with. But here, there's actually a lot of different options. So I think you just try to, one by one, as many as you can within the time limit.
Yeah. And I think it's generally a good case to stick with the rules. I mean, I usually tell the audience, hey, high production and flexibility tends to be the way. But it's a very interesting situation in third and fourth, because you can usually calculate with a lot more certainty. And that's kind of what happened is when I chose the 6-3-4 here, I really felt like the 10-3-8 and the 5-4-11 at this particular level made a lot of sense, which actually meant that we would get the 8-3-4 ourselves here. So, yeah, and you can kind of see I'm kind of going over these spots. You can't hear what I was saying on the previous commentary, but this is just kind of experience, experimenting with the calculations and also playing different people at different levels. You kind of get a sense of what are their tendencies and what they tend to do. Cool. So,
yeah, and I think here, even if they don't take the 8-3-10, 4-5-11, and they do something wacky like 8-3-10, 8-4-10, or something like that, we're still happy with taking the middle and playing road. So there's no kind of terrible outcome that they could screw us over with.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern here, and this is something I wasn't sure about, is does the 4-8 ever go? because potentially I think 4-8 could be a target for orange, but it didn't seem particularly too attractive, especially given the fact that I think the ore just plays a little bit better, maybe even something like, I don't know, the 5-10. So it's kind of hard to say. All right, so let's see what we get here. Yeah, Ray, so what got you into Catan? Obviously, you're a chess player, like I mentioned, and you're a very good player as well. So you have that strategic mind. I'm just kind of curious to what kind of pushed you into this specific game.
Yeah, I think I started around the time a lot of people started during the pandemic, and then I used to play like in real life with friends and family. But I joined all the different Catan discords. I think I started out in Catan community, and then King of Catan and Catan Champs, and then Earth servers, CPI, and yeah, basically play everywhere.
As far as I know, I think you're one of the only people in the world that has a championship in every single server, which is absolutely insane. So the legend of the Rayman is definitely not a surprise to anybody. All right, so the calculations worked out. You know, it's nice when you make the big brain play like that. 8-3-4 is just, I really like it for us here.
I think so. So 8-3-4 versus 8-4-10. I guess the consideration is how much wheat do we really need? Probably not too much for building settlements. I think the smidge of ore is probably better than the 8-4-10, which is a bit more production, but then we probably need to find a way to offload the wheat.
Right. I agree with you. I think as a good general rule, I mean, this applies to almost any level of Catan, but especially for newer players, the 5 resource game where you have the access to everything is a really good starting place. If like you don't know what to do, get all the resources, and that way you have a certain level of independence. You might not necessarily have a ton of ore, but it might just be enough to keep your hand moving throughout the game. Now, here's an interesting.
The road was kind of a tougher question because 8-10 is a very good expansion as well, but we'd probably be racing orange. And that would kind of induce them to rob us at the start, and we don't really want that.
Ooh, 9-2. That's a great point, and something I've learned from you over the years is you're very conscious about the experience of other players, where it's like, maybe I might be able to plow the 8-10, but what's going to happen is I'm going to really, really upset that one player. And I find that aspect of awareness is critical in ranked because one, let's say, petty or toxic player can really tilt the game in the wrong direction. So I think me pointing left there and knowing that I could have gone 8-10, it was more just that awareness of the game.
Yeah, no, that's for sure true. In ranked, you block somebody early twice and you get death threats. So.
All right, so we have all the placements down, Ray, and we see, I think blue placed well. Interesting choice for black to go wheatless, but the most interesting and bizarre choice, I think, has to be the 9-2 here. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, not a fan. He's got very few numbers. I mean, expanding to ore is fine, but it feels too slow and too not enough early production to get going consistently. I mean, maybe sometimes, you know, you hit a 2, you hit a bunch of 9s, and you expand early and it's fine, but a lot of the times this is just not going to work out for orange, I don't think.
Yeah, it's just low production. I mean, I do think the 5-10 is playable. It's not the best. I mean, probably better is to go 5-10 left. I think he's thinking, hey, I'm guaranteeing the 5-10 in most cases by taking 9-2, but it really just looks off to me. I just don't think it's a very good option for him.
Yeah.
But we have a pretty good start.
Plowing us on 8-4. Plowing our 8-4 is probably better for sure, and then 5-10 is definitely better.
Yeah, and there could have been some deals there too. Because by taking the 9-2, he actually kills blue's one of his settle spots on the 9-11. So, you know, there could have been maybe something there to work out with blue, but you got to make your decisions, live with it. It does feel, you know, we have a pretty good start here. How do you look at this position? What would be some of your early game objectives? Like, how would you want to play this in your mind?
Yeah, I think you going to 8-4 first is obviously the right move because
Mhm.
it's a high production spot, 8 pips, which is like almost a mini city, in terms of the number of pips. Like it's a really good expansion, and it's
So yeah,
yeah,
I think as a good general rule, one thing we've learned as principal players is one of your early game priorities is to get your production up. Now, I would say that you really love to go get your cities, which is hand in hand with playing development cards. But don't like sleep on settlement spots, especially when you can pick up these 8-4s and 8-10 spots on the coast. This is a monster spot, and it's going to play really nicely into our game here.
yeah, no doubt. And I'd say in some ways it's better than a city because picked up another tile, right? When you city, it's great for production, but also a lot of that production is blockable because you're still on the same number of tiles, but you've picked up another 8 here
Mm-hmm.
from the settlement, and it's a port, and it's 8 pips, which is almost like 10 pips from a typical city. So it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I find typically in ranked those early city plays can be really like sometimes they work against you in terms of pacing. But considering that this settle is almost just as big as a city, but doesn't have that scary look of dropping the city, I like that aspect as well.
Great.
So we've got the settle here for the 8-4. Obviously, a great spot for us. We get the port. I guess going into the middle game, what would you be looking to do? Would you try to save for a city? Would you be buying development cards? Kind of generally, how do you move into a middle game, like a position like this? Because we don't have a clear or we cheap game, but we do have high production. So kind of how do you read the middle game playing out here? Okay. All right, we had some technical difficulties. No big deal. We're back here. And really nice hand. So we have the settle, and we also have the settle pop, which is quite nice. As a good rule, I'm a very heavy trader. Well, I mean, do you find you do a lot of trading in ranked? Or is it more situational?
It's a little harder because some people are reluctant traders and we don't
Mhm.
have voice chat to sell them on the trade.
Mhm.
But yeah, you try to trade as much as you can in every game. I think we're both big fans of trading.
Yeah. And I know one thing, this is a play you would really like to do where it's just clear your hand. We had a perfect port for a pop. And that to me is a very Ray play. It's just like, do you save for the city or do you pop? You're going to pop.
Yeah, I think so. I think like a big mistake people do in Catan is 7 out too much. Like imagine like 7ing out is equivalent to being robbed 4 times in a row. Like it's awful. And
Yeah.
I think getting your hand size down is super important.
Yeah, that's actually been probably one of my biggest challenges and something I've been very conscious of is I tend to play more on the risky side where I'll pass with 6 or 7 cards, but I'll see that you really push or you'll always kind of have that hand management in the back of your mind. And it's good. I think if you know you're going to need a card anyways, especially like or for us is always good. It's like why not port for it to clear your hand? But
yeah, exactly.
One thing I do find specifically with you, Ray, is there's been a school of thought of, well, you should always save for your first city. And I find you pop a lot. Like you'll do a double pop over like porting for the city sometimes. And I always found that was very interesting. But you also use the knights and you negotiate very well with your development cards. So in that way, I think you kind of have a very interesting strategy.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's by design. Sometimes it's just so happens that you pop once to get your hand size down, you do it again, and then suddenly you're pacing army out, just by happenstance. Yeah, I mean, saving for a city is never a bad play, but as long as you have a plan to up production at some point in the middle game, it's okay to pop a couple times early.
Yeah. I've found particularly, and this is kind of in a season that you've been running and ranked a lot more. I've noticed, I mean, you're at the top of the leaderboard, that usually saving for the city tends to be one of the stronger plays in ranked. But in the Discord games, when you can negotiate, you can use voice chat, sometimes popping a few knights early and using that knight as an extortion tool can be a really effective way. So I do find there's actually different metas, that you have to navigate.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a
and
very
I
general
think
statement, but yeah.
yeah, in setups like yours, for example, where you
Mm-hmm.
you start out with an ore,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only a 3 ore, you're unlikely to roll 2 3s to get a city early. So just clearing the ore out of your hand for a dev card is probably usually the right play, especially you can get an early road builder, early Yop, early mono, they're all good. Even early night is pretty good. So
Yeah, and somehow we are like in this position. We have a huge 8-4 settle spot. So the port's live. We have 3 down development cards with more or less like army. When you look at my hand here and the rest of the board, you feel pretty comfortable that army's locked. Unless you just don't pull any more knights for the rest of the game.
yeah, I think our biggest army competitor is black, but they were a little bit slow to get onto a wheat tile, so
Yeah.
they haven't bought any devs yet, and it'll be tough for them to win army back.
And we also have the advantage of, because we do have those knights, we can always kind of keep that pressure. We can move it between the 9s. We can solo the 6 if we really need to. That's one thing I'm not afraid of doing as much, is like if I have to solo somebody early to secure my advantage, I will do it. Do you find that you can be aggressive that way, or do you try to stay away from solo blocks early?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good play.
Mm-hmm.
If you think like, especially in this game, orange is pretty dead, so it's basically like a 3-player game, and so
Okay.
solo blocking in a 3-player game is totally fine. But doing it like when nobody has any points in ranked is dangerous because people might freak out and get mad at you.
Yeah. And sometimes that can be really devastating to your game.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm playing aggressive knight. I was pretty confident I was going to get a good card here, and obviously I got the ore, which I think most of his hand was ore, which worked out pretty well. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I told you this, Ray. So I have somebody who built a really strong Catan AI. And one of the things, this AI has been crushing a lot of really good players. One thing I noticed this bot does is it will religiously block someone to take them out of the game early. So it might not necessarily block the strongest player. It normally does, but it would really make sure that it blocks one player to take him out, which I thought was a very interesting strategy of this AI. So maybe that aggression.
That is interesting.
Yeah, something is there.
It makes sense that, turning it into a 3-player game would raise your win percentage by a lot. Now it's up to 33 instead of 25. But against humans, if you try that, people might retaliate and, solo block you back. So,
well, they will for sure. Yeah.
They don't get mad at the computer, so it feels comfortable doing it.
That's true. Yeah, I think sometimes people forget about the human element in these games, and it's really prevalent. If you've played more than, let's say, 50 games on ranked, maybe even less than that, you can tell there's definitely an emotional underpinning in this community.
Yeah, it's just come to accept it.
Yeah, I think that's it's a good skill, something that you have as well, as you're very resilient in that way. You don't have a lot of things bother you or affect you, and it's hard, especially when you're competitive players like you or myself. It is easy to let one bad game kind of like spoil it a little bit, but then you always have that reset mechanism. And I find like players that can do that, like they're just more prone to succeed.
Yeah, I think it's a good attitude to have. Just on to the next game.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a stock here. Orange has been kind of in no man's land lost, but big development here for black. I think getting this 693 city makes a lot of sense. The 9s are super killer for him. But they do have the problem of pacing, where we have army in our hand here. And yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. Now, little thing we did there, let me just pull it back. I typically don't do this very often, but I actually delayed the knight because what I want to do is see if we could get black to roll a card. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. We don't want to be robbing orange, and if they can roll an ore or a wheat on the 9, we might steal that. And R4 is only 3 pips, so it's not that likely to roll. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it's, those are like little tactical things that you don't think about, but waiting for black to get a card and then playing the knight. It's like, of course, if the 4 rolls, it sucks. But, I think the math on that probably works in our favor most of the time.
Yeah. I would even go so far as to say if they don't roll a card, maybe we wait an entire orbit and play the knight later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is one thing I've noticed you do a lot. You're very patient.
Yeah. And you're pacing army great here. There's like a double play window, maybe.
Okay. Do you find that is that a strategy that you tend to play for, or is it just you find the windows typically? Like the double play?
I think you don't go into the game thinking you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. It happens if you start out pretty hot and you have enough cards where it's feasible. And here it looks like it is. Yeah. And I think building a couple roads, giving yourself that option, it kind of forces the other players to react and spend their cards in ways they probably don't want to do. Like maybe blue doesn't want to be building roads now, but you might be forcing him to.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And for those who don't know, what the double play is essentially you are playing to get army and road. And I find a lot of times, I would say most people that get the double play are fighting army already, and then they stumble into it. Maybe they get a road builder, and all of a sudden they're at 4 roads from the road builder, and they're like, oh, I can drop an extra road, or they'll get the yop and go for the road settle. So just, at home, just be conscious of that fact that if you're doing well, you've got the materials for it. Why not drop 2 roads? Try to make that play. Be sneaky about it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Especially here where, blue already took roads, so maybe they won't kind of notice it.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of blue, we spent so much time, kind of like the AI, taking out black that like blue's actually not looking that bad here. If they have 2 VPs, I mean, they're at 8 points. And right now, the best that we could do is 7 points with army. So kind of where's your mind at with this position? What do you think needs to happen next? And of course, we're taking army next turn, it looks like. Ooh.
Oh, yeah, that's a painful 7. Yeah, I still think you're in the best spot because they're at maybe 7, maybe 8 with road, whereas we can like take road for 9. But they are a threat. I mean, they've got the 5s that are big roll, the 10s, and if they drop a couple cities before you can take road, then they just might sneak it here.
Yeah. I mean, luckily now that blues clear the target, I think our blocks are a little bit more straightforward. So it's like we can kill the 10, which is a free card. Well, it's not a free card, actually, but it is the road materials. And then the 5 is also a great block as well. I kind of like the fact that because we put a lot of pressure early on black, our objective is a little bit more simplified. It's like, okay, now we focus on blue. I feel like a lot of times a lot of players get so stuck in kind of sharing blocks. And it's like, it's an okay block, but it tends to be very just overall ineffective. So in this way, I kind of like that our game is a lot more simplified.
Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about black at all anymore. You have 4 knights, and so they need 5 to pass us, which is basically like, minimum 5 orbits away because they have to buy them, and they didn't dev here. So black is a non-threat, orange is a non-threat. It's a 1v1 with you against blue now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important, these 8s. These 8s are going nuts. I think it's an important distinction. A lot of players would probably be late to realize that okay, obviously blue's strong, but it's to the point that where it's okay. You can take blue out and focus on blue. And I feel like a lot of people would, continue to put on the 5 or put on the 9, where it's like, you have to be a little bit more pointed, if that makes sense. You got to go for the more of the kill spots.
Yeah, I would disregard orange and black to the point. You got to treat them like the bank. If there's a 3-to-1 trade you can do with them, or a 2-to-1 that's, better for them than you still do it. You just, neither one of them is going to be anywhere close to a threat anytime soon.
Got it. So, and I think this is a really interesting point because our production's been great. We don't have a city yet, but we do have this really cool aspect of like we're moving in towards the middle to end game. We're at 7 points. 7.
Oh, man.
So what do you think is going to be our path here? Because obviously we're fighting blue and we still need 3 more points. Like, how would you try to close this up?
Well, we have still a settle left, and we can win with road. So I think, anytime we can drop roads, we do it. Anytime you have to settle, you probably do it. Maybe not. Maybe you get road first if blue's too close. But it's going to be some city or settle with road. I think if we don't take road, it's probably too slow.
Makes sense. There's always things like the mono as well, so you have to stay flexible to potential development cards that show up. But yeah, I'm also looking at this position saying road is still in our grasp. I mean, if we can settle and drop 2 roads, we win the game. So that's effectively 8 cards.
Yeah. And we saw blue didn't play a knight there, so that we gotta put them at 8 points probably.
Yeah, blue's scary. I mean, if they could somehow get a city, I would start sweating. Especially if they're sitting there at 9 points. So maybe we spend a little bit too much time on black, but for what it's worth, I mean, we definitely neutralized black for pretty much the entire game. So at least our blocks were effective in that way.
Yeah, and you're still in probably the best spot, I think, if we replayed the game from this point 100 times. You got to win definitely 60+% of the time.
Well, it's interesting. Oh, by the way, I mean, just as a little side note, Orange was very miserable this game, and it's tough. I mean, they're on 2 points. I don't know if you have any advice for players that get into a bad position like this, but generally, it's good not to tilt. It's generally good to try to keep a positive attitude. It sucks, but the last thing you want to do is tilt and then try to play your next game in a bad mindset. So it's unfortunate that they're in this position.
Yeah, try not to kingmake or influence the game with the blocks too much. And, share the robs.
All right. So one of the reasons I'm playing it on the 10, by the way, it's still a good block. I mean, the 5 is scary, but I'm going for road. So keep that in mind too, that if you have your objectives, you have to make sure that your blocks and your behaviors are also counteracting your opponent's objectives. If, for instance, I block the 5, which is a very sensible block, but the 10's rolling, my chances of getting road become a lot more difficult. All right, so he had the mono, still a great card. I don't know if that was really the best play for them, though. It felt like a little bit of a weak mono. 4 wheat and then drop a city.
I'm not sure how many of the wheat were from us, because I think ideally for them, they have mono position on us, right? They go...
None.
No, I guess they don't. They go right after you, yeah.
Yeah, so that was...
that makes sense.
That was, I think, 3 from orange and 1 from black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see their dilemma, because we're going to be spending our cards most of the time, so it's never going to hurt us, too badly. But yeah, it's not the greatest motto.
That's something you would see like in the Discord meta, where essentially what they would do is they would make a deal, say, hey, I'm going to take the ore out of red's hand, but I want 2 wheat or 3 wheat, like a wheat from each, as an example.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I have seen those deals happen, actually, in ranked, but creative tricks you can find. All right, so orange, let's see where their attitude is taking them right now with this block. And I
Hopefully
honestly... Yeah, I mean... Okay.
Nope.
Sensible. I do agree the 4 is probably the best block between blue and I, but it was on the 4. So.
I mean, they could have done the other 8, so it's just clearly some sort of biased block, I think.
I really think he's just... I don't know. I think he's just kind of lost the plot a little bit. And wasting time.
There we go.
That's always been strange to me. People that they feel, I don't know, vindicated by sitting there wasting time of not only all the players, but most importantly themselves. It's like, do you not value your own time and what you can do with it? But that's on them, I guess. And I guess this was all over the first Rob. It is what it is. This is an example of managing behaviors, but some people are just unreasonable. So what can you do? All right, so little note for us as well is we do have the ore port, which is a nice little wrinkle here.
Yeah, that's a good point. You wouldn't think about it just because the ore is so rare.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't want to port it, but you could end up doing it.
Yeah, I remember I saw you play a game a few weeks back. We were discussing it, and you had like a super big hand. And I was like, why isn't Ray just porting the ore? Because he has an ore port. And I think he sat on like 8 ore. Or it was something like that. But sometimes it's easy. I mean, I've definitely missed the port, if you're not thinking about it. Because really, the road settle here is really about doubling the 3. But you do get the benefit of the port. So those are just little things. You got to kind of keep in mind what your position has to offer. And even really good players might miss it.
For sure. That's a great point. I think anytime you settle a port, you need to make an explicit mental note that, okay, I have another port now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we've got, technically we can settle with the ore port, but if we can get an 8 roll, that actually gives us, I believe, is it a settle pop? Yes. It's very nice because we can port the ore. So let's see what happens here. Oh man, Orange is going for it. Also surprising too, I mean, considering our production, this is the closest we've gone to having a city. Like, we have a city in our hand. It's just like, it's kind of weird how it worked out. We've just been constantly building roads and popping devs. So.
Yep, we do. So I think we're putting blue at 8 with road, and we'd get 8 if we citied or settled, but we have a chance to take road. That's why we're doing it a tiny bit better.
Yeah. All right, so let's see what we get here. Looking for an 8. It's clockwork. So I guess why don't we discuss this hand, right? Because there's actually quite a few different things that this is like a critical hand, I think, that, don't know if I played it right, but be fun to look at it. So the first thing I see is, well, we just have straight up the settle. The second is we can port the wood for a wheat, but I think my issue with that is if we want to take road, it feels a little bit out of character, if that makes sense. And we're actually just really close to the win. I think if we had another brick, I think it's the win, close to it. So how do you evaluate this hand? What makes the most sense here, Ray?
So I think we have to look at it in terms of this being a 1v1. I don't know. I bet a lot of the viewers kind of play a lot of 1v1. And in that scenario, it's like, how do I win before blue? So blue needs probably, maybe a VP pull and road settle on the 8.
Yep.
And we need to probably secure road before that to force them to extend. So I think it's we either look to city here or we look to take road.
So port the ore and then drop like 2 roads?
Yeah, something like that. Those are the kind of 2 main options. I don't think the settle does a lot. The settle, I guess, sets us up to take road later, but yeah. What do you think?
Well, I believe, looking back at Blue's hand, I think they had the opportunity to port or at least drop some roads themselves. So it's kind of like, okay, if we drop the roads now, we get to 9 points, but then if we lose it, did we actually accomplish a lot? Versus like if we do get the city, we leave a lot of our options open where we can still kind of just build our final few points with the settle and maybe another city or road or another settle, because we're going to open up another settle with the city play. There also is the play of just settling, which is 8 points, and then popping as well. Because the one thing that we could do is if we're pulling the monos, that's probably winning. If we're pulling year plenties, we can take road with that. And road builders, well, that's also road too. So I think by just securing the 8th point and then trying to go fishing, and the fact that we have pulled quite a few knights, I kind of like their odds of getting something good.
Yeah, and we should point out that if you do pull the VP, that is win. So that makes sense, because then you can port the ore for the 2 roads. Yeah, I generally think if you can pull for the win, you probably should do it or give it a shot.
Yeah, I feel like it's a very Rayism to go popping. All right, but let's see how this hand played out. So almost made a mistake there. typically if you have made your decision that you are going to buy development cards, you should buy them first, because that will give you some sense of, how do you want to pivot or how do you want to change? Because like Ray said, if we do pull a VP here, well, then we just win the game. Versus if we settle, then pull, well, then it's like, well, the ordering actually didn't lose us the game, but it was just it wasn't an optimal decision.
Yeah. And even a knight, which is like the worst case pull, is not horrible because we will get to rob blue with it and we'll keep them pinned down. So I think most of the devs are decent.
I'm like teetering on making a mistake here. So this is, I think I was going through the different decisions where it's like I can get the city, I can settle, and I'm like, you can tell like I'm kind of really in between here, because pulling the knight, it's not bad like you said, but we do have guaranteed points. And then of course we pull the VP and it's like, okay, well, that was easy enough. And then we take road for the win.
Yeah, well played. Got the double play.
Yeah. And I guess Orange, I don't know if he changed his tune, but hey, congrats, couldn't go to a better guy. Gotta love the sarcasm. At least Blue was a good sport about it, which really they're the biggest winner when they can deal with that, and at least they GG. And honestly, it's interesting. I mean, this is a 1750 game, which is a very respectable level. And you can see just really basic play, some good calculation in the early game, and having high production with the port, you can really make some work happen. So we'll go through the stats here. Oh, and I think as a quick note, I don't think any monos were pulled. I don't think any... Well, no, there was one mono, actually, if I recall. Poor Orange on 2 there. Dice stats.
The wheat mono.
That's right. Bunch of knights, some resource stats there. We outproduced, right? We'd even need the city. We had 54 cards on our total rolls there, which was great. Did lose to the...
some bad 7-outs that made the game more competitive than it should have been.
Orange is changing his tune. Keep ruining other people's games. Jesus. Jeez.
No, I like what you did there. I think it was creative to take 6-3-4 as third. Kind of people undervalue road materials if it's not a starting road, but yeah, it was, I think, the right pick in hindsight.
And what would you say? Obviously you've played thousands upon thousands of games. You have all the tournament wins. I mean, for newer players that are, let's say, beginner to intermediate, what do you think is going to be the biggest thing to get them to next level, right? I'm putting you on the spot. I don't want you to be prepared here. Like, what, from your experience, what's going to be like the core 1 to 2 things that are going to really move the needle for motivated new players?
I think, it's about finding ways in the early game to up your production where you can be competitive. I think a lot of people like Orange or Black in this game, they take setups that look okay, but they're just too slow to get going. And I think if you can get to like 40 pips of production with like one big city and one good expansion, you should be competitive in most games.
All right, so production, and then one more. I'm gonna get one more insight from you before we depart here.
I think when you get to around 4 points, you have to identify what win condition you're going to try to go for, and aggressively work towards it. And it means kind of blocking your competitor when you can. And let's say you're playing army, a second city is often too slow. You need to start hitting the dev deck once you have your base production of like 35 plus pips up.
Yeah. One way, like, I love that you say that, because I feel like I say this a lot, which is have like a game plan. And you don't necessarily have to have a blueprint of every single move you're going to make. But for most positions, there's kind of almost like a default process. Like if you're playing Orweat Sheep or development cards, there's kind of a blueprint that's been made to how you play those positions effectively, right? You get your city, you pop those early devs, the secure army, you go for the port. So I think having that planned when you're at that 3 or 4 points, say, how do I progress from 4 to 7 to 8 points? Like that jump right there, if you can learn to optimize that jump, you're going to be able to close out so many more games. And I think that's something that from a development card side that I've seen you, it's like you're the best at it. So, I mean, I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing some of those insights with the audience.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's about at some point in the middle game, you have to find the path of least resistance, and that means looking at it from the other player's perspective as well, and what are they going to do? How are they? What win con are they going to fight for? So, I think
awesome, man.
Here, nobody was fighting for anything, so you got both.
Well, I'm sure everyone's going to appreciate your insights and the attitude you bring, and obviously you're very much appreciated in the community as a whole. So again, thanks for being here, Ray. And I'm sure we'll be able to run this back. Maybe we'll get to play some games together and share that with the audience. So again, appreciate it so much, and congratulations. I mean, you've been crushing it for years, but you're also at the top of the leaderboard for ranks. So who knows? Maybe we'll see a Rayman YouTube channel soon, huh?
No, but yeah, thanks for having me, Drew, and yeah, we'll keep playing together again.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate it. All right, Ray, you have a great one, and everyone at home, thank you so much. If you enjoyed the channel, give a big shout out to Ray in the comments. Say thanks, Ray. You're awesome. And again, if you haven't subscribed, don't be afraid. We're having a great time here. We got a lot of content coming out, and the end of the colonist season is coming near. So we have a lot of good content that will be dropping in the coming days. Keep your eyes out for that. All right, I think we're good here. You enjoy the rest of the day. Get out of here.